Have you ever wondered how Buddhist psychology actually categorizes our inner development? I mean, not just as some abstract philosophy, but as a rigid, step-by-step structural science of the mind. Well, you're in exactly the right place. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the ultimate evolution of the human mind, literally tracking how our mental toolkit changes as we level up.
We're basing this whole journey on teachings from the Athaladasana Dhamma school's advanced Abhidhamma texts. And what's so cool about the Abhidhamma is that it doesn't just deal in, vague spiritual concepts. It actually maps out the exact types of thoughts and consciousnesses that are available to you, entirely depending on where you sit on the spectrum of awakening. It's like a highly detailed blueprint of human potential.
Now, the absolute ground rule for our journey today is this magic number, 80. In this specific analysis of individuals, we are dealing with a universe of exactly 80 distinct types of consciousness. Actually, scratch that. The source does note there are technically more states out there, things like fine material and immaterial resultant consciousnesses. But for this specific mapping of everyday human potential, we're strictly looking at these 80. Every single mindset we talk about today is basically just a unique combination drawn from this exact pool of 80.
So, here's our roadmap. We're climbing from the most basic, restricted, rootless states up through the stream enterers and returners all the way to the mind of a perfectly enlightened saint. We are going to track exactly what parts of the mind are gained and, honestly, more importantly, what parts are permanently lost along the way.
Okay, Section 1. Mapping Human Consciousness. Let's establish exactly how Buddhist psychology categorizes every single individual right at the starting line. Because before anyone can even think about awakening, they're grouped by their fundamental baseline nature.
The absolutely crucial point here is that your starting mental toolkit is determined entirely by your patisandhicitta, which translates to your rebirth consciousness. Think of it kind of like your base operating system. It sets the hard limits on what you can and literally cannot process in your current existence. It completely determines your baseline category from the very second you begin.
Every single one of us falls somewhere onto this ladder. You begin with basic everyday existence, step 1 and 2, and then ascend into step 3, the precise eightfold noble paths. Basically, you either start as someone with no roots, meaning you're devoid of certain foundational, moral, or intellectual capacities, or you have 2 or 3 roots. From there, you might step onto the advanced noble paths. Let's look a bit closer at those starting positions.
Section 2, the rooted and rootless. We're going to dive right into those baseline everyday minds, starting with the individual categorized as rootless or multi-rooted. This right here is where the vast majority of standard existence plays out.
This breakdown brilliantly illustrates how your baseline completely defines your toolkit. Look at the Dugatha Ahitaka. These are beings in awful states like realms of suffering. They only have access to 37 types of consciousness. They are literally locked out of 43 types, including all the highest wholesome states. Then you have a Sugatha Ahitaka, say a human born with severe congenital defects. They have slightly more access at 41. But the Trihetaka, that's someone born with all 3 wholesome roots, non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. They have the absolute widest everyday mental range possible, unlocking up to 54 states.
So, simply being born with 3 roots vastly expands your mental capacity. You jump all the way up to 54 of the 80 possible consciousness states. It's a huge upgrade. But, and this is a really important but, for the Trihethuka, those 54 accessible states still include all 12 of the unwholesome consciousnesses. So yeah, they have a vast mind, but it is completely unprotected from things like greed, hatred, and delusion.
Which brings us to Section 3, entering the stream. What actually happens when an ordinary, unprotected person steps onto the path of awakening and becomes what's called a stream enterer? This is the Satapana Phala, and it's the very first major breakthrough in the Noble Path.
This is where a truly profound shift begins, because leveling up here doesn't mean gaining new things. It actually means shedding the negative. They instantly drop 5 unwholesome states. Unlike our modern idea of self-improvement, which is almost always about accumulating more skills or cramming in more knowledge, the Abhidhamma shows us that true ultimate spiritual progress is actually all about subtraction. When you break down exactly what falls away, the shift is just incredible. The stream enterer permanently loses all consciousness associated with skeptic doubts and wrong views rooted in greed. Their total pull drops from 54 down to 50. I mean, think about that. They can literally never again experience a thought of skeptical doubt regarding the path.
nor can they experience those 4 specific types of greed that are paired with wrong moral views. It's like those specific files are just permanently deleted from their mental hard drive. No way to restore them, ever.
Moving right along to Section 4, the returners. Now we're looking at the next rungs on the ladder, the once returner and the non-returner. These are the individuals who are seriously deepening their practice. They are systematically cutting the anchors that tie them down to ordinary existence. So the once returner holds steady with a mental toolkit of 50, but the internal quality of that toolkit continues to refine. Now, if you're just looking at the raw numbers, their profile might actually seem identical to the stream enterer at first glance. They do still have those 7 remaining unwholesome consciousnesses, but what changes is the depth of their realization. They upgrade their foundational fruit of practice from stream entry to once return. So they're heavily weakening those remaining unwholesome states, even if they haven't entirely dropped off the map just yet.
And then we hit the non-returner, and boom, another massive drop in negativity. They shed 2 more unwholesome consciousnesses. This is known as the anagami phala stage. The mind is becoming intensely, fundamentally purified here. Let's look at exactly what they lose to get their unwholesome states down to just 5.
Notice the profound shift in what is now permanently locked away. The non-returner has completely eradicated any consciousness rooted in aversion or anger from their mind forever. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. An anonymity, a non-returner, simply does not possess the mental hardware to feel angry, irritated, or averse to anything ever again. It's impossible for them. Their total consciousness pool shrinks down to 48, making them profoundly detached from the friction of the everyday world.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the perfect saint. We've reached the summit of our ladder, the Arahant Phala. This is the ultimate goal in this entire psychological mapping. We're talking about the state of complete and total liberation.
Now, you might naturally expect the ultimate master to have access to every single possible thought in the universe, right? But no. An Arahant's mental toolkit actually shrinks all the way down to just 44 types of consciousness. It's such a brilliant subversion of how we usually think about mastery. Think about it. The highest being in this system actually has fewer types of consciousness available to them than the person with severe congenital defects we talked about at the very beginning. But it's absolutely not about lacking capacity. It's about ultimate efficiency. It's the total eradication of all unnecessary mental noise.
And here is where we find the ultimate paradox of enlightenment. An Arahant obviously cannot experience any of the 12 unwholesome states. But remarkably, they also cannot experience the 8 wholesome states. Instead, they operate purely on what's called functional consciousness. Why is that? Well, because wholesome consciousnesses actually generate karma. They are essentially investments in a future rebirth. And in Arahant, they are entirely off the wheel of rebirth. Done. So they don't generate wholesome karma anymore. They simply act with functional consciousness. It's just pure, clean action with 0 karmic residue. They are completely liberated from the burden of those 36 unwholesome and karma-generating states.
But nestled beautifully within those remaining 18 rootless consciousnesses they do keep, there is one incredibly exclusive state that ordinary beings simply cannot access. It's known as the unique, smile-producing consciousness of an Arahant. While ordinary beings, and honestly even advanced returners, are completely locked out of this state, only the perfect saint unlocks it. It represents a pure, unconditioned joy, a joy that isn't dependent on anything happening in the outside world, perfectly reflecting their total liberation.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a second and consider your own daily reactions, your doubts, your aversions. Ask yourself, what parts of your mental toolkit might you be ready to shed? We spend so much of our lives trying to add to our minds, right? More information, more experiences, more desires. But as this ancient psychological map so brilliantly illustrates, true elevation is actually a journey of letting go. So, what unnecessary mental states are you carrying around today that you could maybe start dropping tomorrow? Just something to think about. Thanks for exploring this incredible framework with me.